Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It is January 22nd. It's been a week. I've unmuted my mic for the folks on the streaming platforms. We're streaming live to the YouTubes, the Facebooks, the Twitters. We're on the Twitter Spaces. We're going to open it up. If anybody on the Twitter Spaces has some thoughts that they want to share in a little bit, once we've finished our sort of recap of the last 4 days, if you got some thoughts that you want to share, we'd love to hear from you. What a week in Alberta politics. We're going to start with the light stuff and kind of work our way up in intensity and Richter scale as we go. To start with, we're going to go with something nice and simple. Let's talk about the carbon tax. Danielle Smith campaigned heavily on the carbon tax. She talked about how it's evil and it's very bad. And she was going to absolutely take the federal government's court. Was going to be one of the first things that she did because it was so very bad. And she believed that she had a strong legal argument. Well, it came up again, as well did a couple of other things on her weekly radio show, which to the surprise of many did go ahead yesterday. Here's what she had to say about the carbon tax.
The advice I was given is that the Supreme Court is not inclined to review a case unless there's been some time between when they make their judgment and when we need to reassess. So the guidepost is you can't really just keep on litigating things once it's been decided by the Supreme Court. You've got to have new information. I think we have new information. We've got an affordability crisis. We've got an energy security crisis. But I think we want to make sure that we're in a position to be able to win that. So in the meantime, we have just called on the federal government to pause their increases. They're planning a 300% increase in the carbon tax by 2030, supported by the federal NDP. They have a coalition agreement that includes just transitioning our workers out of the industry as part of their coalition agreement. But the other part of the coalition agreement is increasing the fuel tax that is causing so much harm here by 300%. And so we have called on them to not do that. We've actually called on the opposition leader to work with her federal leader to rescind that call as well. I think if she wants to demonstrate that she's got some power, she should demonstrate that she has influence over Jagmeet Singh, get him to drop the just transition legislation and get him to rescind his call for a 300% increase in the carbon tax. That would make a real difference to people. So this is a political solution, I'm afraid.
So it's a political solution. She needs Rachel Notley to do her homework, apparently, because Danielle Smith doesn't have the relationship with the federal government for some reason to make the appeal. Please hold off on that 300% increase. Never mind the fact that it's not just the carbon tax that's going to be rising by 300%. It's also the rebates. So for the vast majority of people who actually, most Canadians, most Albertans, they actually come out ahead in regards to how much rebate they get versus how much they pay for carbon tax. They actually make a little bit of money on the rebate. And it's going to be going up at the same rate that the carbon tax is. So it's not going to make any major differences, even if there is that increase, because people will continue to get the rebates at that 300% increased rate. She talked about the just transition. So I have to say it again. It's not just transition. It's not the Nike swoosh. It's not just do it. It's just as in justice, as in just society. And the just transition is not about shutting down oil and gas. People have been very, very clear about that. The just transition is simply about, hey, there are major changes coming to the energy sector. And if y'all don't retrain some of your workers, you're going to have a bunch of people who don't have skills that they need to work in the new energy economy. The federal government is saying, hey, maybe we should have a program to take care of that, help you out with that. But Danielle Smith is putting all of the emphasis on the wrong syllable and making it all about just transition, like it's some sort of ridiculous scolding. Moving on from there. The meds arrived. Oh, finally. Some of you might remember, beginning of December, Danielle Smith, Jason Copping stood up in a pharmacy, beat the heck out of a lectern. Calling it a lectern because I'm not going to get scolded on Twitter again for calling it a podium. You stand on a podium. You stand behind a lectern. They announced that they were going to be spending an unknown amount of money to buy 5 million bottles of children's Tylenol, children's ibuprofen from a company that didn't actually make it. They just made the precursors, but they'd worked out a deal. They were going to get approval for this brand new product that wasn't actually approved to be sold or distributed in Canada. And they were going to make sure it was here before Christmas. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. Didn't get here before Christmas, but we did see the arrival of 250,000 bottles You can see the picture, the tweet. Jason Copping, he's standing in a plane. 250,000 bottles, desperately needed, except not really. Because the 250,000 bottles that we're talking about are 250,000 bottles that didn't have the child-proof caps that are required for over-the-counter medications, and they didn't have the correct labeling that's required to put them in stores or to sell them to the rest of Canada. There's been a lot of people who have said, hey, you know what, the labels, it's no big deal. Why are we upset about the labels? Everybody speaks English in Alberta. First of all, that's not true, and I'm sure that Sarah's blood pressure is already rising as I say that. But secondary to that, part of the plan for these meds was always, hey, you know what? We're going to buy this great big bulk order at a premium, and then we're going to get the rest of Canada to buy some. Well, if you don't have the labels, you don't have the childproof caps, ain't nobody going to buy them. But they needed to do something with the 250,000 that they started with. So they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to give them to hospitals, even though there's never been any reports of any shortages of children's Tylenol or ibuprofen in hospitals because they can compound their own. We're gonna bring these bottles into the healthcare system. I'm sure there's no deals with any current distributors who are going to be at all annoyed that they've had their products displaced for the foreseeable future, and who knows how long this stuff is going to last. So it's a bit of a. They tried to take a victory lap on it, but unfortunately, some other stuff happened this week. We're going to get to the big one in just a little bit, but before we do, there was another big one because one of the other things Danielle Smith campaigned on. Bigly was you know what, we're going to do a COVID inquiry. We're going to take a look at what happened. We're going to see what went wrong. Where did the experts fail us? How did they fail us? There's been a lot of talk about this. It's been kind of controversial because some of the names that keep popping up are a little bit let's go with problematic. But we got an announcement this week. We know who the chair is, and it's pretty interesting. Preston Manning, looking only slightly like he's back from the dead, is slightly back from the dead. It was announced this week. Danielle Smith mentor, they go way back, an ex-leader of the Reform Party, Preston Manning, was chosen to head up the province's inquiry into COVID-19 response. Now, there's some problems right from the start, okay? The first problem is Manning's the chair, and in an unusual turn of events, he gets to choose himself all of the other members of the panel. There's some questions to be asked there because Manning doesn't have an extensive background in healthcare. He does have a background in politics. He does have a background in saying some inflammatory things, but he doesn't have a background in healthcare. He's not a practicing lawyer. So when it comes to the assessment of the legal side, maybe not the most qualified guy in the room. But this is the one that Danielle Smith felt it was critically important that she went with. And she did also clarify on her radio show this week why she felt it was so important to go with Preston Manning.
To make sure it was somebody who was of high stature, who knows how to do this, who's been in the public eye, so that people could have confidence in the outcome. And when you ask somebody who's a high-profile person to give up everything else that they're doing, sometimes you have to be willing to pay for it. So I acknowledge the concern that was raised, but I think from a future, from the point of view of making sure that we've got robust processes in future, I think we needed to have someone of his stature in the position.
Had to have someone of his stature. Super important. He's a tall man, I guess. But you got to pay if you want the product. We know that. We just talked about the children's meds. We paid a premium for that. We're paying a premium to pull Preston Manning away from whatever it was that he was working on, which kind of gets to the next question. What was Preston Manning working on? Well, for a while now, he's been talking about how he wants to have a citizens' inquiry, a real grassroots endeavor where he's going to put together this panel of people who are going to do a look into everything that went wrong with the pandemic. He's been talking about it for a while. He actually launched it back in November. So he announced there was going to be a national citizens inquiry into Canada's COVID-19 measures. And some of the things that he predicated this stuff on had to do with a survey that they had done. Now, this survey was conducted by their little group. They surveyed 1,533 people across Canada. And they said, hey, how is COVID for you? And they had some fun with numbers. And they said, well, 74% of people said they did not enjoy their COVID experience, which isn't that surprising given that we're talking about a global natural disaster. But when you take a look at the numbers, it's particularly interesting. This is, by the way, the highest quality graphic that we could pull off of their website. The fuzziness, I don't know, maybe there's some things, but they broke it down into three categories. So the first question that they asked was among the four categories of negative impact. So out of the gates, they're already defining for you what the four categories of negative impact were. Which was the one you and your family experienced most seriously? One option was none. And shockingly, 26% of Canadians who were surveyed of this 1,500 people across the entire country of varying geography, 26% they weren't affected negatively at all. They're fine. No big deal. 74% picked one of the other four options. So this survey presented people with four options. And then if you wanted to, you could choose none at the end. And then they added together all of the four options and said 74%, they didn't like their COVID experience. That very clearly means something is horribly, horribly wrong. Now, there's a couple of things that we have to be very clear about. So first of all, not only is this a very small survey, this is not a great survey when we're talking about the makeup and the representation of the entire country of Canada, but it is what pollsters would call a push poll. The question is formulated in such a way that it predisposes people to give an answer that works for the poll. It's a small poll. It's a small survey. It's a poorly constructed one. But it's the one that Mr. Manning used to justify this national COVID investigation. Now, the same National Citizens Inquiry includes a link, and it comes up in the press conference as well that Mr. Manning did, when he announced that he was doing this thing, and it's quite the little read. It's almost as if somebody took like you know what we need for COVID? We need like a freedom-loving 50 Shades of Grey fan fiction version. That's what we need to put together. So Mr. Manning wrote this, it's like 45 pages of fiction. And it's clearly stated right out at the front. This is what he imagines could happen. This is what he believes could happen if people drank his particular brand of Kool-Aid. And there are some pretty alarming conclusions that come up in it. So, for example, there's a fictional distinguished medical academic, and Mr. Manning quotes him saying, in a time of further enlightenment into the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, we have seen a new kind of discrimination emerge that has distinguished the vaccinated from the unvaccinated, which has created a medical apartheid. It gets even more interesting. Enlisting and quoting alternative science and medical information from sources such as the Barrington Declaration, the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, that's important. We're coming to that in a minute. And the Social Science Research Network, the commission made it clear it was not necessarily endorsing the representations of any sources, only maintaining that they represented legitimate scientific positions worthy of consideration and discussion by governmental authorities and the public rather than denunciation and cancellation. No, they did deserve denunciation and cancellation. The Great Barrington Declaration, if you take a look at some of the signatures, the names of the signatories that are on there, they don't exist, and some of them are straight up farcical and satirical. Also talked about when politicians in healthcare, the big question that comes at the end that Mr. Manning poses to his audience in his 50 Shades of COVID, whether the politicians and healthcare bureaucrats responsible for the mismanagement of the COVID pandemic should be held financially liable and or criminally responsible for the damages suffered by hundreds of thousands of people, communities, businesses, and other organizations as a result of the inactions and actions by the government of Canada in response to the pandemic. This is the dude that Danielle Smith picked to put together the commission, questioning the legality of what was done. Now, there's some other things that are included in there in this work of fiction. He supposes that, you know what, it's entirely possible. All those flags that were there, the Nazi flags, the rebel flags, even though that person's since been identified and has doubled down on their position, they were maybe they were paid protesters. Maybe it was all just a front. Now, one of the other things that happened is during his launch, Manning also talked about the specific type of testimony that he would like to see come forth at his inquiry. It's worth taking a listen to.
Well, one thing on this website, one of the background items is that there was a group in Toronto in June that conducted a sort of a test hearing. What would happen if you had public hearings for 3 days? They had 60 different people testify, most of them for 10 minutes, on what the effects were on them. Those testimonies covered quite a range. It wasn't just negative health impacts. It was the rights and freedoms, the social, economic. But the ones that did testify on the health impacts, there were two categories. One was from people that felt that the lengthening of the waiting lines were people suffering from something other than COVID, people that had people die on the waiting lines because of our incapacity of our system to handle a surge in demand, that was a negative health impact as a result of the COVID restrictions. And then others were on the subject of adverse effects from the vaccines. But I would think from what we've seen thus far, those are probably the two types of testimonies with respect to health impacts.
Those would be the two types of testimonies he wants to hear. He loved what that group did. Hey, who was that group? Remember how we mentioned in his fan fiction how much he loved the Canadian COVID Care Alliance. Look, they've got a website. It's got a picture of a doctor smiling. She's holding a clipboard. It's got to be good. She looks really friendly. It's independent, science-based evidence to empower Canadians. Well, if it's independent and science-based, you know that it's got to be good, right? So who are they? Well, that's a whole other set of questions. Let's let one of their leaders, one of their head organizers, get us started. This is Sonya Anderson speaking on an Alberta-based podcast.
Canadian COVID Care Alliance came about in March of 2021. And it started off because a group of people were concerned that a lot of early treatment drugs weren't being utilized here in Canada, and around the world, were being overlooked. And there were drugs that there were an awful lot of studies that had gone into them, people that are frontline clinicians that were having great success with them. And it was a group of doctors and scientists that kind of all found each other organically. And then Peter McCullough, helped to get many of them together as well. So they came together in March.
Now, there's a whole lot to unpack there. Before we get into the name that got dropped there, we just want to go back a sec and talk about the disclaimer that exists on that website. The big button right in the middle there. You can see it says, please read our website disclaimer. Big red. Hey, you should probably look at this thing. And there's good reason for that, because the disclaimer is very clear. The information contained or presented on this website is presented solely for educational purposes, only on matters of interest for the personal use of the reader, who accepts full responsibility for its use. The information is provided with the understanding that the authors and publishers are not herein engaged in rendering medical, pharmaceutical, nutritional, mental health, legal, or other professional advice or services. But wait, it's independent science-based evidence to empower Canadians. I'm so confused. Let's move on. We name dropped somebody there. Peter McCullough. Who's Peter McCullough? Well, he used to be a board certified physician. He's not anymore. He had his board certifications removed. He was stripped of them because he has repeatedly and willfully, against the advice and the recommendations of the people who are involved in medicine, those boards, the same boards that certify, they warned him. They said, Pete, you got to slow down, man. The things that you're saying, they're just not true. And you're hurting people. Please stop lying. Peter refused to. He had his stuff all stripped. If you go to the Wikipedia entry for Peter McCullough, one of the things that he's famous for is misinformation, disinformation, and falsehoods. That's literally in his bio on his Wikipedia page. So disgraced Peter McCullough was the catalyst for them forming. The CCA was formed largely because they wanted access to these treatments that they couldn't get access to. Anybody want to guess what we're talking about? Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Because of course they were. So who is Sonya Anderson? Well, let's let her again explain for herself.
I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I come from more of a citizen activist, more of a government relations type person. I really think that it's important to engage with political officials, because what most people don't understand is that at the end of the day, they're just human beings. They're just people like you and me. And what they really need is to be educated on a lot of the issues. So none of them are experts in virology or immunology. And certainly when, COVID came along, they had questions. So we had people that were reaching out to us from government, and so we decided within the CCCA to develop a government relations committee so that we could answer those types of questions. So we really try to connect government officials with scientists, doctors from across the country.
So they cherry pick scientists and doctors that they put in front of politicians in order to try to inform them. And she's not wrong. We've talked about on the show before that politicians are not experts. Good politicians listen to the experts that they have. This was one of the biggest complaints in Alberta during the whole pandemic, rather than allowing the experts to drive the show. And the legal cases have since demonstrated that they should have more, rather than allow the chief medical officer of health to fulfill her role as she's supposed to under the law. We had Jason Kenney stepping up with a whiteboard and trying to educate us all. Because it wasn't about what are the experts, it was about look at me. So Sonya, she's not wrong. Politicians should listen to experts, but they should listen to actual experts, not people who are pushing an agenda and providing their own experts based on that agenda. But let's get back to that 3-day event, because that interview that you just saw, that was filmed at the 3-day event that Sonya and the Canadian COVID Care Alliance organized. Now, the testimonial list, you can go on their website, and the testimonial list is a smorgasbord of people claiming vaccine injury, bizarre legal opinions, despite the fact that they have no legal background whatsoever, and of course, included members of, wait for it, the Alberta Prosperity Project. Because of course it did. In fact, one of them is the one who was in the very first clip that we played. The gentleman in that very first clip is none other than Leighton Gray. He's heavily involved with the Alberta Prosperity Project. And some of you might remember he got into a little bit of hot water a little while ago when Doug Schweitzer was still the Justice Minister. Leighton Gray was covered by the CCC for sharing social media posts from Russian sources, no less, that claimed the European Human Rights Court had been co-opted by George Soros, and Black Lives Matter is a leftist lie. Mr. Gray had to resign from the Alberta Judicial Vetting Committee that he was a part of. So his role up until he went down the George Soros conspiracy theory. There's some other stuff that's in here there too that's pretty distasteful. But before he went down that particularly rabbit hole, he was part of the committee that was choosing judges for the province of Alberta. So that's fun. But let's talk about Sonya Anderson for a sec. By her own description, her background is she has a bachelor's in physical education from roughly 30 years ago. She also claims to have discovered politicians only have access to the news and no other sources of information, despite the fact that there's an entire public service that exists to try to advise politicians once they're elected what they should do, what the best information is, and in some cases, not saying that this is going to be relevant later, but perhaps what the limitations of their roles are. Now, to her credit, she did successfully fight off an ethanol plant that was going to be built in her community. She and a group of people did that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she's like totes qualified to lead an org that is pushing an anti-vax rhetoric, alternative treatments. And oh, yes, let's not forget about the letters. Because one of the other things that their organization provides is a letter that anybody can print off and take to their physician to demand that they get access to ivermectin. Now, of course, there's a disclaimer at the bottom of this one as well that basically says the exact same thing as their disclaimer on their website, but it's pretty clear what they're after. They have this belief that ivermectin is the cure-all. It's a wonder drug. I want to be clear, for some things, ivermectin has established medicine that it's very, very good for. But for other things, ivermectin is not good for, like COVID. It's been demonstrated. But they've got this letter people can take to their doctor to harass their physicians into giving them or trying to get them ivermectin. It's fascinating to me, as always, that we have these groups that are wildly anti-vax. And if you take a look at some of the testimonies that they included on that 3-day panel they had in Toronto, there were a lot of people who are making some pretty bold claims about vaccines. There were a lot of people who are making some pretty bold claims about what they experienced because of vaccines. Now, these same people will advocate for taking a drug that has no demonstrable benefit and arguably harm for COVID. There's just dissonance there for me. But talking about that 3-day panel, you have to know what's coming next. Who was the hosts at that panel? Who were the people who ran the show in Toronto for 3 days, listening to the anti-vax, pro-ivermectin testimony? Opening moderator Trish Wood, award-winning journalist, and panel members Preston Manning, former leader of the federal opposition from 1997 to 2000, and then some other people too. So Preston Manning, who loosely referenced this organization in his 50 Shades of COVID fan fiction, and who loosely referenced them in his press conference, was so deeply entwined that he was a moderating panel member for 3 days in Toronto, but he's heard some things about what they do. Now, there's a few other things that we got to get out of the way here, because very clearly Preston Manning does have at least the perception of a bit of a bias here. But what's the role of the new official inquiry, sorry, because he's left. He's said, I'm going to leave that thing behind. I'm going to go on and do the good work of the Danielle Smith government. What does he have to say? Well, in an editorial that he wrote that was published just a couple days ago, the specific task of the panel would be reviewing the Alberta statutes that informed and authorized the government's response to COVID-19 and proposing amendments to such legislation that might better prepare the province to address future public health emergencies. That doesn't sound too bad, because the courts did say, hey, you know what? It seems like there might have been some confusion in regards to the CMOH and what her powers were and how they could have been exercised. But wait, there's more. The panel will examine whether there are ways in which the government should amend legislation to improve the quality and breadth of the medical advice used in responding to future health emergencies and improve communications with the public during such emergencies. Which is actually kind of wild, because he's clearly saying, hey, you know what? Maybe we should include some other medical ideas that aren't maybe based on evidence-based medicine. Maybe we should just, I heard there's these Canadian COVID Care Alliance. They seem cool. I read their Yelp interview. But what's really fascinating is that last part doesn't appear anywhere in the actual terms of reference for the Public Health Emergencies Government Panel Review. It's not in there. The whole appendix that defines what the terms of reference are is on your screen right now. If you're watching the YouTubes, if not, you should find our YouTubes and you can watch it. But it's also very publicly available. And nowhere in there does it talk about, hey, maybe we should expand the definition of medicine. It's not in there. But that's part of the thing that Mr. Manning is very clear in his editorial that was just published a couple days ago. That's what he wants to bring to the table. So already he's moving the goalposts, not to where they're supposed to be, not to where the confines of the rules are for this thing, but very clearly where he wants them to be. There was no correction issued for that editorial. Danielle Smith didn't come out and say, whoa, I know he said that he wants to expand the definition of medicine maybe a little bit. There was nothing. So again, we have, as you'll see, we have a little bit of a theme going on tonight. Somebody wandering off, maybe making up some rules on their own, and the Premier of Alberta either not aware of it or silently being okay with it. Now, the one other question that we had to ask before we move on from the Manning situation is if you look on your screen here, we're bringing up the website for the Mr. Manning's National Citizens Inquiry. A little bar on the top there, home, about, commission. Oh, look, there's a donate button. This organization has been collecting funds since they launched. Mr. Manning said he wanted to have a budget of $2 million. Well, Danielle Smith was very clear. He had to abandon this. That's why Albertans had to pay him $250,000 so that his sole focus, the $250,000, he gets paid regardless of how much time he puts in, by the way. But that $250,000, that's to cover getting his full attention. He won't be working on anything else, which sort of begs the question. We have this official who in their private time raised a boatload of money and then got a government gig. Where's the money going to go? Is this going to be another super sweet tax donation write-off to the JCCF? We don't have the means to get the answer to that question. We're almost at the big stuff, because there was a story that dropped from CBC. Oh boy. January 19th, just a couple days ago. It's corker. CBC reported that the Alberta Premier's Office contacted Crown Prosecution about the Coots case. And there's been a lot of speculation as to what was said. It's a weird story out of the gates. There's no question about that, because CBC says they heard from multiple sources whose anonymity they're protecting because these people are afraid that if they came forward, they would lose their jobs. But CBC very clearly has enough. They've seen enough. They've heard enough. These sources are credible enough that they went ahead with the story. Now, one of the things that's really important to highlight is the two reporters that we're talking about. So the two reporters that wrote the story together are Megan Grant and Elise Van Scheel. These two reporters are two of the best political reporters that are in Alberta. Both of them have written major stories on major scandals in government over the last few years. These are top-notch people. They would not. It's inconceivable that they would come forward with this story if they didn't have bulletproof stuff to back it up. They wouldn't risk their professional reputations. They wouldn't risk damaging the lives of the people that are involved in this story. It just wouldn't happen. So there is a lot that we don't know. For sure. There's certainly a lot that's going to be playing out over the next little while. But the crux of the story is early on in the Danielle Smith administration in fall, so presumably we're talking right after she was premier-elect, or premier-designate. I don't know. It's on the bottom of this next slide here. Premier-designate. She and her transition team took over the office of the premier after she won the leadership. And in that period of time, one of her staffers sent an email to prosecutors inquiring about, hey, so this Coots thing, you really think you need to prosecute that? Maybe you don't. Maybe there's another way to look at this. Who was the transition team at the time. Rob Anderson, who is the same Rob Anderson who was a PCMLA, then a Wild Rose MLA, and then a PCMLA, and he's also a lawyer. And he's the author of the Free Alberta Strategy. And he was Danielle Smith's campaign chair. We got Marshall Smith. We've got Peter Guthrie, Erica Brudies, Chief Billy Morin, Jamie Masterson, Jonah Masterson, and Matt Solberg. Those are all the people who were involved in the transition. So conceivably, that's the short list of people that that we're potentially talking about who would have written these emails. Now, this is really problematic for a bunch of reasons. We've talked about it on the show before. Danielle Smith has actually said on multiple occasions on video that she herself has directly contacted the Crown Prosecutors Offices. She since walked that back and said, oh, no, even though I said it very deliberately twice, I didn't mean it. I was being imprecise. What I meant to say was I actually talked to my Attorney General, Tyler Shandro. I know I say Crown Prosecutor. This happens to everybody, right? Despite the fact that she said that twice on video. She's now dealing with the fact that that's very, very bad, because having an independent judiciary is really important. At the end of the day, we do not want, nor should anybody, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, we don't want anybody who's in elected office making decisions about who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. Do we really want to have a premier who gets to decide that her political rivals are going to be prosecuted for things? Do we really want to have a political government that gets to decide who doesn't get prosecuted, who gets a pass, who gets to do wildly illegal things and just get away with it because somebody from the premier's office made a phone call or sent an email? Regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, whether you're the far right conservative or the far left woke, that should scare the crap out of you. But that's exactly what Danielle Smith said she did on video twice. And that's exactly what this story says a senior staffer of hers did as well. It's almost impossible to overstate how serious this is. There are certain cornerstones of society that we just need in order to function. And rule of law is absolutely one of them. We elect people to work within those systems, not override them. This is critically important. What has Danielle Smith said that she's going to do to address this issue? Well, let's listen to the radio show.
I want my caucus to understand the nature of the story, the fact that they've done a clarification that they don't have emails. They launched with the story that we are now having to verify. And I want my caucus to just be patient so as we go through the process. And as soon as we see if the emails exist, then we'll make sure that we have a presentation to the public. We'll know next week.
If there are indeed emails, and from what we know so far, that it's just an allegation, but if there are, would you agree that it stretches credulity that a staffer, knowing what's proper and what isn't, would send anything of such consequence without someone higher up having knowledge?
As I said, it is all of the communications I've had with the department have been appropriate. It has been through my Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General. I was given legal advice very early on that is the only appropriate way for me to be able to have those communications. And so that's what I've done. And they've given me advice and I've taken it.
Now, again, we just have to unpack that last little bit there. Very early on, she was given legal advice that she absolutely should only be speaking to the Attorney General. Very early on, she was told that was the only appropriate pathway that she should follow. And yet, when she went on to far-right news networks, on video, on camera, aware that she was being broadcast and recorded, did she say that? No. What she said was, I've been talking to the Crown Prosecutors. I've been directing the Crown Prosecutors. So even if you want to believe that Danielle Smith misspoke, she misspoke despite the fact that she's explicitly acknowledging she was told don't ever do that, which is at best stunningly reckless and incompetent. But that's what the Premier of Alberta is saying that she did because reasons, I guess. Now, with all that being said, we're going to bring in our bigs because there have been a few developments that have gone on in the meantime and in between time. Sarah Biggs, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
There we go. How's it going?
I'm not muted anymore. Your
There we go. I
webcam
think we
is
got you
off.
back.
I'm good. Okay. I'm good.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm apparently dealing with some minor technical difficulties. But
Well,
I'll get
while
those
you
fixed in
deal with
just a
that, I
second.
got some fun facts about Preston Manning affiliations if you want.
Oh, I'm going to give you the full screen and let you do that while I try to solve this problem.
Okay, so, little things here. Preston Manning, his report is reported the COVID Commission was published by the Frontier Center for Public Policy in Winnipeg. If we remember this week, there was a little bit of controversy, I believe, on Monday or Tuesday about Pierre Poilievre attending an event there, and no questions from the media would be taken. I'd like to point out to some of their, commentary, such as, just give me a second here. I was, doing a little bit of homework. So the, just let me find it. God damn it, I lost it. So they're saying that, the book from 1889 about First Nation is, still a reality today. They have, published a lot of terrible things like briefing notes, like here, no, sorry, I lost my page. Essays here. If you go on the fccporg, A Distant Mirror of the Indians of Canada, written in 1889 by John McLean, Christian missionary, philologist, and ethnologist. The antagonism existing between the customs and dialects lies with two races, and that their despondency consequent upon the changed life of the Indians are important factors and in frustrating relations. There's another one that says, out from the shadows, could Christian nationalism be the antidote to globalist tyranny? Oh my God. And then Preston Manning said in 2009 at the Canadian Science Policy Conference Center, if you go on page 9, we're going full circle. In order to get a better response to scientific proposals at the political level, Manning said that there needs to be politicians and senior staff with a background and interest in science, something Canada is severely lacking at the moment. By Manning's count, there are only 8 members of parliament with a real science background, and the situation is even worse on the provincial level. When scientific issues comes up in caucus, who is the champion? Manning asked. This lack of scientific knowledge is reflected in the nominal attention given to science in political party platforms and infrequent reference to science in political debates, despite the importance of many scientific issues, including health, the environment, and economic competitiveness. Sorry for my Frenchness. In order to deal with this issue, Manning gave 2 suggestions. First, encourage the political parties to recruit more science-oriented candidates, and scientists could create a list of potential nominees to give to parties. Second, establish a parliamentary office of science and technology, similar to what the British have had for a number of years. Nate.
It just hurts. I gotta quickly tap in on something that Plain Power said in the comments here, because we have a couple people who are like saying A1 reporters. I hope that comment was directed towards Megan Grant and Elise Von Shield, because as our bio is very clear, we're not journalists, hacks, pundits, satirists, all of those good things, absolutely. But we stand on the shoulders of giants, to be clear.
And it just happens I know a thing or 100 about politics.
Exactly.
It's my
Sarah,
job.
so we had the very bad day of the emails. We saw yesterday that Danielle Smith went ahead with her radio show. It was probably one of the most negative radio shows that I think that she's had yet. There were a lot of people who were super unhappy, and those are presumably through the carefully sorted comments and such. But nonetheless, it wasn't great. And then we had us last night, which was wild. For anybody who's not familiar, one of the things that happened, Danielle Smith, and she kind of alluded to it in the clip that we played a moment ago, Danielle Smith had herself an emergency caucus meeting. Now, Sarah, I'm going to get you to speak to this a little bit, because emergency caucus meetings don't happen very often, especially when it's like, hey, we just cut out of the legislature early. We're all enjoying our holidays. There's not a whole lot going on. To have an emergency caucus meeting is one thing. To throw it up on a Saturday afternoon when a lot of stuff's going on the weekend, that's pretty unprecedented. How big of a deal is this?
A big deal.
Okay, fair enough.
Like, yeah. So yesterday morning at noon, my battery was at 50%. That's how big my cell phone battery was, at 50%. That's how big of a deal it was. Usually, if there are some matters are not pressing, or to have an emergency caucus meeting, there's something really, really, really bad is happening in the background. We need to try to kill it, contain it. Or there's enough members of caucus that are asking for an emergency meeting because they would like to address sometimes perhaps leadership issues.
Perhaps, hypothetically.
Perhaps. I was not there. I'm not an elected official. But damn, Saturday at 4, it was called at 3:30 yesterday afternoon. Friday afternoon. The email was sent out at 3:30. So one's going to ask, so I have a few questions. I've been trying to find the information, but I haven't received anything yet. So the question is, was it called by caucus members that are horrified by what's happening right now and they're trying to fix it because ding dong, election is coming and looming? Or B, was it Danielle Smith trying to spin the issue before they released their pre-chewed email in response on Monday? Because they already decided what was going to happen. They already decided what the outcome of it would be. She's going to try to kill it in the egg. But then
this is
I
where
have
the
even more
response,
questions.
This is where the response is particularly interesting, because what she said she's going to do is she's going to direct the IT department of the public service to take a look at all of the emails that were sent by her staff from their government emails to all of the Crown prosecutors who received them at their government emails. But one of the things that has been well documented is that the UCP has adopted, well, in government, this practice of, well, we could use the official channels, but then there'd be a record. What if we use unofficial channels and then just delete everything as we go? This is something that has been publicly reported on. And it's fascinating. I just want to throw up this little graphic here because this makes me giggle. Despite the fact that this is well-established practice, despite the fact that the Danielle Smith is clearly limiting the investigation that's happening over the weekend to the government stuff only, not personal email accounts, not things like Slack, not things like WhatsApp that we know her government caucus uses.
Signal, Telegram.
What did Danielle Smith have to say before? Back in 2011, Danielle Smith was very, very clear how she felt about who should be using what kind of information and how. And she was pretty unimpressed with the idea that former tech minister Ted Morton had potentially been shredding documents and deleted information when he left. The quote that I want to read is at the bottom. It is essential that Albertans are able to find out what ministers are discussing and who they are discussing it with. I hope Frederick Lee Morton can assure Albertans nothing untoward was destroyed in his office, but now that it's gone, there's simply no way to know. So Danielle Smith, a decade ago, when she was in government, she felt it was very important that Albertans had access to transparency. And yet she's doing this half-baked, half-assed investigation over the weekend where she's clearly going to be able to say, because the rumor, and I have to be very clear, this is just rumor, but the rumor is that the messages that were sent were not sent through those government pathways.
Yeah, that inquiry is as transparent as my grandmother's cataracts. We'll put it that way.
There we go. So
It's
Danielle Smith is
nothing.
presumably going to be able to release a performative, hey, everybody, we looked into it. And
Nothing.
there were no notes left on anyone's desktop that we saw, and none of my staff said that they did it. So there must not be anything to it. Now, where this gets interesting for me is based on some of the things, I think a lot of people know we've got little birds that whisper in our ear from time to time.
Did they ever bust?
What? This was interesting, though, because the caucus meeting happened. And normally after a caucus meeting, any caucus meeting, there's always like a, hey, everybody, we met and we chatted about things. There was a wonderful cheese plate. Jason Nixon's still very tall. He didn't have very much to say. Seems like he's better
so
about
tall.
something.
Like I'm 5'3" and I'm a midget compared to him.
But there's usually some sort of a statement or press release. We saw during some of the caucus meetings that happened when Mr. Kenney was having his leadership woes, people were running in and out to keep the reporters updated. It was radio silence last night on all fronts.
Even the usual people are keeping us informed, or keeping the media informed, or keeping everyone informed. It was extremely so until Holly texted me last night. It was late, and we were like, something's up. It's not normal, because usually, after when there were meetings after about Kenny's leadership, or people would be in front of McDougall, journalists would be there, and questions would be asked, and people would, elected officials would comment. We have seen none of that. I know that there was an online version for the meeting, an online option. So maybe that's why we didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, or, apparently meeting lasted an hour.
This is what we're hearing, is that the meeting only lasted an hour.
Allegedly, the meeting.
Allegedly. So this is all, again, unconfirmed rumors. This is just our regular folks that have consistently been fairly accurate. Do with it what you will.
They have a good scorecard. They have a good scorecard.
As I said earlier, in a bizarre twist, there have been no statements made about the emergency caucus meeting to determine whether or not one of Danielle Smith's staff tried to subvert democracy. Apparently, that's not something that we issue a statement on. But
I don't think
it was
just about. It was just not about that night, though.
Well, we're going to get to that in a sec.
Yeah,
what we've been told is that it lasted over an hour, and caucus is, and this isn't the first time we've heard it, caucus is quite split. Half of the people are like standing behind Danielle Smith going woo. The other half are legitimately quite concerned, not only the nature of these allegations, but the implications of what it's going to look like for a provincial election that may or may not be happening in May. Smith is apparently quite confident that the internal audit, as everybody we just finished talking about, is largely almost certainly performative. She thinks it's going to exonerate her and her staff. The Smith was clear on her radio show, and it's consistent with what we're being told as well, that the internal government emails will be released early next week. And Smith's largely going to say, well, that's it, folks. That's all. We did our investigation. It's all good. Now, again, I want to highlight that I simply cannot believe. Here's where I got to go. Danielle Smith lies. Yeah. It's just the reality. Danielle Smith lies a lot. The true reporters are some of the most ethical, professional reporters that exist in the Alberta politics scene. So on the balance of just those two things, I mean, I kind of know who I'm lining up with.
Yeah, it's for them to come out with a story like that, it's because it fits a certain behavior that we have been seeing from the premier's office for a while.
Oh, for sure.
B, they had to double, triple, quadruple, and quintuple check. We're talking about the CBC. We're not talking about the Western Standard here. Where they're like, oh, they're here campaigning.
Or the breakdown, in all fairness.
Or the breakdown or whatever. So, they have. So I know some people have issues with that, but there's journalistic etiquette and ethics. So ethics is a big word. Maybe some people would like to look it up because it's very, very complicated. And, it kind of have to make you act in good faith and as a good person and doing something for the public interest and the electorate's good, not just for your own. It's very complicated. But what we need to understand is that the CBC would have never greenlit. So that story probably went through the lawyers about 100 times. They seeked opinion. They talk to a lot of people. So basically, when you're hearing a rumor or something's happening, you call a person, then you call somebody else from the other side, then you call someone in the middle. And if you're hearing constantly the same thing over and over again, then usually the story has legs. But the CBC would have never greenlit such an article just by a whiff or a whim. It's not a fart. It is something that is probably happening. And half Caucus is horrified. I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen this week, because if half Caucus is horrified right now, and that was the drop in the bucket that makes it spill, I remember last week, Nate, I said they have about 2 to 3 weeks to act. I still stand by it.
Well, if this is where and here's
Sorry,
here's
I'm gonna have my orange.
You have your orange. Here's a couple of the other things that I wanted to address, because one of the counter arguments has been, well, we haven't heard anything from the Crown Prosecutors Office. They're not saying very much. Maybe I'm wrong. It certainly wouldn't be the first time. There are definitely people who argue that I make an art form out of being wrong. We all have to be good at something, but it would seem to me plausible that, given that this CBC reached out to the Crown Prosecutor's Office and said, hey, we'd love to get a comment on this situation. What do you guys think? We're told that one of the staffers from the Premier's office not only violated protocol, standards, ethics, laws,
Interfered.
but they interfered in the administration of justice, or at least attempted to. What do you think? If I'm the person on the other end of that phone call, after I do my I don't know anything, man. This is news to me. Let me see what I can figure out. The very next phone call that I'm going to make is to the people who do their own investigations. And at that point, when there's an internal investigation going on with the Crown Prosecutor's Office, everybody, it's done. No more talking about any of the things, because they got to figure out what the hell's going on.
So I'm not a lawyer. Granted, please, I'm not a lawyer. I really am not. So we need to understand that when something is being investigated, it's going to look a lot like the RCMP investigation in 2017 leadership. Yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, some progress was made. But right now, we're at the very, very, very beginning. And the Crown Prosecutors, if they are doing it right, and if the processes work properly, they will not be commenting on the matter whatsoever until they can pinpoint it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you know what? I would make signed affidavits to all of the 34 staffers in the Premier's office?
Well, this is the question that we asked in our little thread earlier today once we started to get
Yeah.
the little bird starting talking again. But like, if I was Rachel Notley right now, if I was
Barry Morishita,
any political person of any political impact or sway, I would be saying, okay, here's the deal. If you're going to produce this thing that says the internal emails had nothing to do with it, that's cool and everything. But can you get every single one of your staff members to sign an affidavit saying that they have never contacted the Crown Prosecutors Office using any pathways whatsoever? And if you can't get all 34 of those staffers to say, no, I've never tried to subvert democracy or break the law in that way, that's pretty telling to me. Think they're going to do it? Are we going to see that call from any of the Alberta Party or NDP folks?
I don't know. Like, they seem to be swinging in different ways every single day. Maybe they should have a press conference about it tomorrow. But, the only way to settle this is with an independent investigation. Independent. Hand it over. So there's a lot of questions that the public could ask. Was the office of the Premier compromised? Are there any Crown prosecutors that are not,
The question needs to be asked.
Like,
are there Crown, if this
are
was
the Crown
personal
prosecutor playing
communication,
kosher? Yeah.
if there was personal communication to personal communication, if that's what happened, which is some of the speculation, then are there Crown prosecutors that are in any way compromised? That's a fair question to ask. It doesn't mean that they are, to be clear. I'm not saying I'm not casting any aspersions.
No,
but if we
no,
can't
no,
ask
we're
that
not.
question, we got big problems.
So there's an article that was released on Global News at 5:45 tonight, and apparently, as per Mr. Rick McIver and Mr. Jean, the Premier has the full support of Caucus. So I don't know how. So there's a few things that could happen. Be like, hey guys, your job's at risk. I'm going to pull the election and everybody's going to go down in flames. That could be number one. There's a lot of innuendos or a lot of, suggestions that could be done. A lot of things that could be insinuated. A lot of things can be said. I'm wondering if they have had the proper conversation and if anyone has had the cojones to stand up and say enough. Enough is enough. Like, I was looking at some polling numbers this week and it's disastrous right now, even the original. It is absolutely disastrous. So what is there to do for them? Will have the caucus that is divided. Of course they're going to show unity. Of course they're going to be sending their people. And, got to be like, you are going to say this and you are going to say that. And they have to remain on script, unlike the Premier.
Well, let's remember, Brian Jean, when it comes to his objectivity and his ability to sort through the accuracy and reality of the situation, the day before amendments were introduced to the Sovereignty Act, stood up at a press conference and said, hey, you know what? Sovereignty Act's perfect the way it is. Brian Jean, who used to be a lawyer, there's no changes that need to be made. It's all good. It's fantastic. Best act ever. You're going to love it. He did that. So for Brian Jean, the same guy who gave the full-throated endorsement of the Sovereignty Act that was subverting democracy and giving MLAs the power to write laws on their own without any kind of oversight, for him to say, nah, that's cool, and the next day for the amendments to be over, I don't know that perhaps his ringing endorsement of Smith carries a whole lot of weight in this moment.
Yeah. A lot of ministers are being put on script. They like to do that because sometimes they can perceive them as threats. So they like to keep them on a tight leash. Let's just put it that way. Sometimes you have your ministers that are really good at what they're doing, but they would be considered like ungovernable. And they are put on a tight leash and press secretaries are there and they are watching. So It's going to be interesting to see what is going to happen this week. But let me tell you this. Caucus is not filled with Mensa members. Albertans are seeing what is happening. And some charges were dropped last week. And some of the cases in the Coots matter. I have a feeling that Albertans will not let that one go. And I hope they won't let that one go. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about a premier who wants to implement her own police force. God help me. Wants to implement her own Alberta Tax Revenue Agency. Holy crap. Who, depending on the media she's talking to, cannot keep a story straight or changes her story completely to adapt to the crowd that she's talking to. So it's either she's extremely disingenuous or she's just pandering to whomever is listening to her, depending on the news out there. So we need to be careful. We need to watch what's happening. Guys, email your MLAs, knock on their doors, tell them you're concerned, write emails, call the Premier's office. I'm not calling for a rebellion here. I'm just saying, if you guys are unhappy, do something. Because the MLAs will hear you. They will see your feedback. They will see your emails. They have to respond to every single email. You are allowed and authorized to express your concern as Albertans. Just like we did for education, just like a lot of us did for healthcare, we need to keep the pressure on because we are talking, they're talking about freedom of speech, and what about the good old conservative values of following the rule of law? Again, we're going back to good old conservative values. But what we're seeing now is more a holy fuck, it's turning into a Republican kind of banana republic instead of a parliamentary system. The Premier says, does things, freedom of speech is fine, but it has consequences. And you're free to do whatever you want, but there are consequences. If somebody wants to drive their vehicle inebriated, there are consequences to it. You haven't filed your taxes for 50 years, you don't get your Canada pension plan. There are consequences for not following the rule of law. Like not getting your vaccine, you can't get on the plane. That's easy. It's normal. Everybody was lining up to get the damn polio vaccine in the 1950s. Ask my neighbor, he would have loved to have the polio vaccine. He's 75 and he's walking with a walker because in Israel, didn't have access to the polio vaccine on time, and he was one of the victims. Conversations matter, words matter, and everything has consequences. There's always the return of the bounds that's going to smack in the nose.
Can I read one of the quotes from that article?
Yeah.
I just can't. In the ringing endorsement category, we have this quote from Mr. Jean. What I did do was listen, and I made sure I was attentive. I didn't need to be there, but it was a great meeting, and I'm glad we had it.
Are they being told to play footsies with everybody because they want to? I understand the need of not wanting to deal with your dirty laundry in public.
Brilliant.
But at this point, we're talking infraction of justice here. We're talking with interference of justice and compromise in the criminal justice system, for God's sakes.
And it's not like it's unprecedented because, again, the current deputy premier is the ex-justice minister who had to step down because he was found to have tried to interfere in the administration of justice. Like, this is not wildly off-brand. And it's quite, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see whether or not I mean, wow, Wednesday's going to be a fun show because if Smith comes out and says we did our little internal investigation, we didn't find anything. I've never heard of WhatsApp, then or Signal or Slack or if that's what she comes out with, I mean, I haven't
I'm
seen
gonna be hurling. I'm gonna be so mad. Like, fuck's sakes. Like, why? Do they really think we're that stupid?
Have you
Does
seen
she
her Facebook
really
page?
think? No, I don't go on Facebook. It's a cesspool.
Good choice.
Sorry, guys. I just put pictures of my baby to update my family back east. But so here's what I'm going to have to say. We have the chance to do things right again. We have the chance to show that, whatever you want to call it, conservative value, it is time to do the right thing, guys. It's time to wake up. I don't give a shit about party unity right now. There's major incidences that are happening on major cases, and we're just going to let it go? Being elected is a privilege, and you uphold responsibility when you're sitting in those chairs. And you have to have the provinces and Alberta's best interest first. Put your ideology book on the side. Put your goddamn advisor that is going haywire every day and just posting stupid shit on Twitter. Sorry, I'm going to fix my headphone. Writes a ridiculous Alberta sovereignty act that turned into a very expensive wet paper tiger. Have we had enough yet? Once again, where are the moderates? Where are people I know that have a brain? Where are they? Have they been muzzled? Have they been threatened to lose their nomination? Is Back Alberta going after them? Because that's another thing and a half. I'm sick of it. It's not a democracy anymore. It's turning into a goddamn kerfuffle of poop.
You kind of ran out of steam at the end there.
I think my husband's watching, so I'm trying to behave. But we are at a turning point, and we have time to do the right thing. Like I said in an interview before, I'm tired of trying to define what is left and what is right, when what we need to do right now is the right thing to do. Put Albertans first. Put your ideology or party, sorry, I was told that I need to stop talking when I'm adjusting it. And when I yell, it kind of pops out. So, put the party ideology, outside the box for once and really think about what your mother would think of you if you follow and support something that's driving the province into a goddamn wall. I'm angry. I really am angry.
I want to get before we come up to our hour and a half mark. I do want to get want to get your thoughts on the Manning sitch. How's that going to go? $250,000. He gets to choose his panel, and as we walked through it the first half of the show, got a little bit of bias maybe.
So a good friend of mine offered me a emergency ambience candle. It's called Crisis Wine. I don't drink. And it's called Holiday Drama. So just let me light that on first before I talk so I can find my zen.
It's the angriest matchlight I think I've seen in a long time.
I'm an ex-smoker, right? So, it's... But no, it's extremely bad. It's going to be, seriously, we're going to see... Oh, who do you think they're going to be calling? Alberta's favorite doctor who wrote a letter saying that 80 patients, 80 dollars. No, but that's where we're at, Nate.
I know, but I don't want us to be.
I know, but echo chambers are toxic. Echo chambers are dangerous, especially when it is driven by misinformation and far-right, racist, anti-scientific, Jesus pusher. I'm sorry if anyone's, I'm not talking about, Catholics that goes to mass, using Christian white nationality identity. That's what I'm talking. Like the Jesus Guns and Baby crowd. Sorry, I should have been more precise. But we need to pay attention. We need to speak up. And guys, I cannot stress that enough. Volunteer. Either it's with your teachers, participate to some of those panels they're having right now. Participate safe. Whatever is your area of interest, oil and gas. There's a door knock with an association you care for. Reach out to your MLEs. They're paid to listen to you, by the way. They are, so they don't have a choice. Citizen engagement will be key this time around. We do not have a choice, because if we don't do anything, either to try to save, some conservatives, some PCs right now are really, really, really upset. And I'm not PCs were perfect. Nobody's perfect in politics. Let's just get that straight. There's less worse people, and there's really, really bad people. Pick who you want to support. If the conservatives want to try to save the conservatives from turning into a very, very worrisome American-style Republican populism kind of leadership, and we do nothing to stop that, because it does not mean, it's not conservatism, it's populism. We've been saying that for a year and a half, Nate, and we will not stop saying it. Do something, because if everybody's just sitting there on their benches and not doing anything, guess what, guys? That one's going to be on us.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I think that the Manning thing is just...
It's bullshit. It's pre-chewed bullshit. It's ready to go to the printer already. It's all preconceived notions. It's all pre-chewed stuff he's going to take from his stupid inquiry with some Alberta favorite doctors I cannot name, because they're going to try to sue me again. Oh, no, wait, they're going to try to go to court and ask them if they could sue me. That's a different thing. But, don't participate. Don't pay attention to it. Don't give it any legs. They're spending $2 million on that piece of bullcrap. Do we want to see where we went wrong, where we should have done better? Absolutely. But when it comes from an extremely biased view, looking for divergent medical opinions or medical professionals that have not been listened to, because hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, aka horse paste, are not treatments. So ivermectin is a treatment for what? Parasites, right? Oh, shocking. Guys, let's listen to the real doctors. Let's listen to the ones that have fought at the front lines and have been dealing with full ICUs for 3 years almost.
And maybe haven't had their board certifications revoked.
When you use your license to practice, usually something's wrong. Just saying.
It's true.
I'm not naming anyone.
Nope, we didn't say. Oh no, I'll say that McCullough lost his board certification because I had the.
Yeah, that's fine.
I got the receipts for
that. He's not
that.
gonna try to. You got the receipts. Well, we got the receipts for everybody. They just don't like it for their ego.
Yeah.
Because they Google their name 15 times a day and they're trying to see who's talking about them, and then they stalk you everywhere, and then they send you threats, and it's like, then you just block them. I call them frequent flyers.
I got emails from one of them for a while. He got off Twitter, I think because they forced him off, and he got found suspended. My email address, and like once a week I was getting like, here's all the reasons why you're wrong, and also did you know about XYZ? And it was just like, I'm never going to reply to you, man. I don't get it.
Well, the thing is that I'm mandated to have my email address public because I'm anonymous.
There you go. Other than the performative release of the internal emails. But her emails. What are you watching for this week, Sarah Biggs?
Am I going to say it again?
Oh,
am I going to say it again?
Hold on a second. I'm gonna put that on pause because for the first time in like weeks, we've got somebody on the Twitter Spaces who wants to say something, and I want to see if it works.
Oh,
so fingers crossed. Let's see if we can get the person going, because like I love that we have the Twitter Spaces thing, and I got this whole mess of gear over here to make sure that it works. So Lynn, say something. Let's see if this works.
Hi, Nate. How are you tonight?
Oh, it works. I'm great.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask Sarah how I could join the Manning inquiry, but she kind of blew that out of the water. I just want to say one thing. I was at Malonka in Fort McMurray last night. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. And it horrifies me that the people cleaning the tables who are single without kids are getting zero money, while our dinosaur, Preston Manning, is getting $250,000. Like, people, I mean, Sarah's already said it. I've been told many times when I make phone calls, emails are more efficient because they have to respond to them. So I will be doing that tomorrow. Phone calls, emails, whatever. We just need to get this out there, because this province that I was born and raised in 65 years ago is turning into a shit show. That's all I want to say.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Lynn, and thank you for writing your MLA. I can tell you that I've spoken with mine, and I have had correspondences where I have expressed my concerns, and it really is. I mean, one of the best things that these elected officials can hear from people is that they are playing a dangerous game, and they are eroding their support. And I know that you've spoken on the show before where you've talked about your husband has had some changes.
Yeah, stage 4 cancer that apparently caused himself.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's healthier than I am, but whatever.
I'm so sorry, man. I'm so sorry.
No, you know what? The thing is, he was diagnosed with it within 6 days. So what we could have done to change that, I don't know. His diagnosis was 12 to 16 months in 2015, and the man is still alive, volunteering for the Arctic Winter Games, grooming Birchwood trails. Because you have stage 4 people doesn't mean it's a death sentence.
Yeah. No, I know some people that had.
I better be quiet.
I know some people that had stage 4 colon cancer, and they have fully recovered. Absolutely, with the right medicine, the right care, the right attitude, the right support, absolutely, you can recover. I hope he will keep doing good.
I hope he enjoys the Arctic Winter Games.
Yeah, with vaccination, that's awesome.
All right. Thanks again, Lynn. Not only for sharing stuff, but you just gave me proof of concept on this ridiculous assemblage that I have over to my right here. They said that you couldn't route Twitter Spaces audio into a live stream, and the 46-year-old punk rocker who has too much audio gear said, "Oh, I bet you can," and you just proved that we could. So I want to say a big thank you for that, because nobody's been saying anything on the Twitter Spaces for like 2 weeks, and I've been dying to find out if I actually made it work.
We've been too angry. We've been way, way, way too angry.
Scaring people away. If anybody else on the Twitter Spaces wants to weigh in before we shut it down, love to hear from you. We know we can now. In the meantime, I want to say a big thank you. Wow, the chat was super active tonight, which was
I'm gonna have to go check.
Really great to see. Thank you for everybody there. Yeah. Other than the emails, anything else we should be expecting to watch?
I'm really worried something else can blow up.
No, you can't say that, because you said that on Wednesday, and on Thursday the email story came out. There we go. It's going to be terrible. Thanks, Sarah.
I'm going to go now.
I blame you entirely.
Oh, my back.
All right. before Sarah dies.
I need my rollbacks.
There we go. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who hung out on the live stream tonight, everybody who hung out on the Twitter Spaces. And we're going to be back on Wednesday. We're going to be doing another one of our shows. It is almost certain that there will be plenty more to talk about because that's the world we live in now. But in the meantime and in between time, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more than if you thought about maybe signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors. If you got maybe you're getting an extra $100 a month at the end of the month, and you're like, what am I going to spend this $100 of this affordability payments on? I know what would really piss Danielle Smith off. I'm going to give $5 of it to The Breakdown. That'll make her crazy. You can even tweet it out. It'll be fun. Sarah's got something to say.
Sorry, I forgot to say something. So we were talking about education, get involved in all that. I heard that they are holding education roundtables across the province right now, and I think there's one Airdrie, Cochrane, Medicine Hat, and Calgary this week. Check it out. Get involved. Just saying, like, it's examples like that. Sorry, I'm good now.
This is gonna make like the clumsiest seg in the history of segs.
Yeah, I'm really good at it.
But so we've got a Patreon page, and if you want to piss Danielle Smith off, then sign up at our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Make sure that you tweet it out at Danielle Smith AB, and maybe even at Free Alberta Rob. That could be fun too, because ambiently raising somebody's blood pressure is never a bad thing. So there we go. Big thank you to all the people who are currently our Patreon sponsors. I know that I've been talking about it for a little while now, but our fun little episode on a certain far right media group, we're so close to done. I'm so excited to share it with you all, and our Patreon sponsors will be getting early access to that because they get early access to all of our interview episodes and all of our little special little one-offsies. So yeah, you can sign up at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Sarah, any other final thoughts for the evening?
It's going to be one hell of a week, guy. Pick and choose who you're listening to. Pick and choose what you're reading, and be opinionated. Oh, and Maddie counted up to 5 today. I need to brag.
That's better than me most days. I get to 4 and I get all confused. I go back down to 3. I don't know what it is. Numeracy literacy.
We've been doing math though. Did you know that if there's only 30 UCP caucus members, they're like, you know what, we're not liking what we're seeing right now. They could pretty much relegate the UCP to the opposition. I'm just saying. We did some math, Nate and I, yesterday, and numbers matter.
I want to leave everybody on a happy little thought here just before we do the sign off, because one thing is important to keep in mind is that the Premier of Alberta does listen when people tell her things.
BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I'll never get tired of that. Thank you, everybody, so much for hanging out tonight. We will see you on Wednesday. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and keep the conversation going.